Ashwapati moves freely through these ideals kingdoms, partakes of their beauty and greatness, but doesn't stay there. He goes beyond. He, through the ideals kingdoms, moved at will, accepted their beauty and their greatness bore, supported their greatness, partook of the glories of their wonder fields, but passed nor stayed beneath their splendors ruled. That is, he didn't stay there, he did not pass under their rule, he went beyond. All there was an intense but partial light. It was an intense light, dazzling enough, but it was partial. It didn't satisfy him. In each seraph-winged, high-brewed idea, united all knowledge by one master thought. He describes how one important looking idea, highbrow idea, dominated by one master thought, in which apparently all knowledge was united, seraph-winged, soaring high, persuaded all action to one golden sense. This one idea persuaded all activity to one meaning, to one golden sense. All powers subjected to a single power, and made a world where it could reign alone, an absolute idea's perfect home. That is to say, each perfect idea wants to be the soul and organizes a kingdom for itself, where no other idea can enter. That is the limitation of thought, that it is exclusive, and even at the level of idea, each idea claims to be absolute. It refuses to relate itself to other ideas. Insignia of their victory and their faith, they offer to the traveler at their gates. They, the denizen, the angels, the guardians of this world, they offer to Ashwapati, who is traveler at their gates, as an emblem of their victory and their faith, a quenchless flame or an unfading flower, a flower that doesn't fade but blooms forever, emblem of a high kingdom's privilege. It is only in such a high kingdom that there is a flame that is not extinguished, a flower that does not fade. And that is possible only in the kingdom of the ideals. A glorious, shining angel of the way, guardian angel, presented to the seeking of the soul, represented by Ashwapati, the sweetness and the might of an idea, each deemed truth's intimate fount and summit force. Each idea is deemed to be the intimate source of truth and the highest force of truth, the heart of the meaning of the universe. Each idea claims to be that. Perfection's key, passport to paradise. In spite of their claim, in spite of being presented with such idea, Ashwapati finds, yet were there regions where these absolutes met, regions still above, where these absolutes met and made a circle of bliss with married hands. Normally the absolutes do not meet, but here in these higher altitudes they meet, and as if they are married, with their hands they weave a circle of bliss. Light stood embraced by light, fire wedded fire. But none in the other world would his body lose. Each idea, though it may consent to marry another idea, it would not lose itself. He says, but none in the other world, but none in the other, no idea would lose itself in the other idea, but none in the other would his body lose, to find his soul in the world's single soul. This is the secret. If we want to find our sanctuary, our heaven, in the single soul of the world, we have to lose our own self in another self. But none in the other would his body lose, to find his soul in the world's single soul, a multiplied rapture of infinity. So, they forfeited this multiplied rapture of infinity, of multiple manifestation. Onward he passed to a diviner sphere. So Ashwapati is not satisfied. He passes on to a sphere which is more divine. There, joined in a common greatness, light and bliss, all high and beautiful and desirable powers, forgetting their difference and their separate reign, become a single multitudinous whole. All of them forget their separate identities and become one whole, a single whole, but that whole is multitudinous. Above the parting of the roads of time, above the silence and its thousandfold word, the silence is expressed by the thousandfold word. In the immutable and inviolate truth, forever united and inseparable, the radiant children of eternity dwell, the high gods, on the wide spirit height, where all are one. All are one without forfeiting their individuality. All are aspects or parts of a multitudinous whole. And it is there, to that diviner sphere, that Ashwapati now passes. and he steps into the self of the mind. This is a most very important canto, Canto 13, which we are now starting, particularly for those who practice meditation, detachment, seek the self, Atman. This canto, meditated upon, is capable of giving that experience of the lone self, that which lives apart from everything, though at the level of the mind we are apt to think that the self can be attained only at the spiritual level. It is not so. At every level of existence, at the back, there is the self, which is supporting but not involved. And at the back of the self is Satchidananda. That is why, even at the physical level, without being mentally developed, spiritually enlightened in the way of knowledge, it is possible to realize Satchidananda at the body level. But in doing so, you withdraw from this manifestation. You don't do the grades, but you withdraw. Now here, the poet speaks of the self of mind, because Ashwapati is still in the realm of mind. The ideal mind is over, and before he passes into the spiritual, he touches the self of mind. He says, at last there came a bare, indifferent sky. It is nude, not contaminated by the movements of Prakriti. Indifferent. It does not react. It does not move into any excitation, where silence, listen to the cosmic voice. Only there is silence. Whatever the cosmic voice, around or below, the only silence. But answer nothing to a million calls. A million calls come up from the universe. But this self of the mind only hears, but does not answer. The soul's endless question met with no response. The seeking soul is full of questions, but the self does not give any response. So much so, an abrupt conclusion ended eager hopes, all the eager hopes of the seeker, Ashwapati, are suddenly forced to reach an abrupt conclusion. Questions are not answered, hopes are not fulfilled, but everything comes to a standstill. A deep cessation in a mighty calm. A finished line on the last page of thought. Book of thought. The last page we have arrived there and finish. No more page for the book of thought. A finished line on the last page of thought, and a margin and a blank of wordless peace. After the finish line there is a blank. Margin of the writing there is blank. There paused the climbing hierarchy of words, because the self is always behind. There paused the climbing hierarchy of words. He stood on a wide arc of summit space, alone with the enormous self of mind, which held all life in a corner of its vast, all the multitude of the universe. All life occupied a small corner in the vastitude of the self. Alone with an enormous self of mind, which held all life in a corner of its vasts, omnipotent, immobile, and aloof. In the world which sprang from it, it took no part. The world has indeed sprung from the self, but the self does not take part in the play of the world. It gave no heed to the paeans of victory. If there were celebrations of victory in the world, it did not give its ear. It was indifferent to its own defeats. Defeats of the world in the world emanated from itself. Or movements inspired by the self, if they were checkmated, if they were defeated, that means spiritual effort was defeated, it was indifferent. It heard the cry of grief and made no sign. Not that it was deaf. It did hear the cry of grief, but there was no sign that it had heard. Impartial fell its gaze on evil and good. Impartial, the gaze was impartial. Whether it was good or whether it was evil, there was no reaction. It saw destruction come and did not move, unless impelled. One who is in the self does not move to stop the destruction, whether it is of oneself or of others. These lines apply very literally to Sri Aurobindo. There is a particular sonnet in the last poems, I don't remember the title, where he describes how they attacked. It was written mostly in 1938 or so, when he was not well. He says how the aging comes, how the destructive forces come, but he is serene. He doesn't say himself, but he describes. And these lines, actually I have seen him, and he was like that. Each line reminds me of him. When I used to see him in Darshan Sofa, that imperturbable calm, even that little smile which was somewhere hovering, it is impersonal. And a sense of mightiness, grandeur, magnificence. There was nothing human about him. But there is a warmth. One never felt small before him. One always felt elevated, elevated. One felt oneself something of Sri Aurobindo when one came back. And those who have talked to him, mixed with him in the early years before the ashram formed, confirm that he was more impersonal, even as mother was personal. As she lent herself to us, he was always impersonal, except in some letters like those he wrote to Dilip or Nirod. There was no I. And a sense of mightiness. But he carried everything lightly. He didn't intend to be serious. He didn't intend to be solemn. But it was that. For hours together, after 1938, attendants have described to me how he would just sit on his cot with some mudras, gestures of his fingers, which were mudras. And he was like a babe in the infinity. One never saw that he was such a great rishi. At that time his expression was of a babe. And he would be always, sight would be at the wall. There may be 10 people around, 7 or 8 people. But his sight would be at the wall. And all these people around would not dare to utter a word. It was only when he would turn aside and look at somebody smilingly. Usually when he wanted to make people talk, he would ask Purani some question on the war situation, because they were the warriors till 45. And once he looked, then only others would start talking. But any moment he could relapse into silence. And mother had always felt that these people were disturbing his state of consciousness. So when these people would come to know that that was mother's feeling, they would be very solemn. But immediately he himself would make some jokes, lighten the tension, and mix with them. He had that compassion. Compassion, humanity. And as he has said somewhere, he stooped. He says, I stooped low to touch you, but I have been disappointed that nobody comes up. It was not during the ashram days. It was said during the pre-ashram days. So as I was reading these, I could not help but make reference. He says, omnipotent, immobile, and aloof, in the world which sprang from it, it took no part, it gave no heed to the pains of victory. It was indifferent to its own defeats. It heard the cry of grief and made no sign. Impartial fell its gaze on evil and good. It saw destruction come and did not move. An equal cause of things, of good and evil, life and death, a lonely seer, and master of its multitude of forms, it acted not, but bore all thoughts and deeds. The witness Lord of nature's myriad acts. The witness Lord, seeing the myriad acts of nature, consenting to the movements of her force. In the very act of witnessing, there is the sanction. The Sankhya philosophy is based upon this, that the Purusha, the self, does not need to go on supporting, acting along with nature, along with Prakshakti or Prakriti. The very act of seeing carries the sanction, carries the command. So it says, the witness Lord of nature's myriad acts, consenting to the movements of her force. His mind reflected this vast quietism. When he enters into this zone of the self, Ashwapati's mind reflected this vast quietism. This witness hush is the thinker's secret base. The true thinker, the thinker of truth, his secret base is in this witness silence, not in the frothy movement of thought. Hidden in silent depths, the word is formed. The potent word is formed in the silent depths hidden from view. From hidden silences, the act is born. Not only the word, but even the act is born from hidden silences. From hidden silences, the act is born into the voiceful mind, the laboring world. In secrecy wraps the seed, the eternal source. Silence, the mystic birthplace of the soul. Silence is the noun here. Silence, the eternal source, plants the seed of things to come. And this silence receives that seed, wraps it in secrecy. And this silence is the mystic birthplace of the soul, because it holds the seed sown by the eternal in its secrecies. In secrecy wraps the seed, the eternal source. Silence, the mystic birthplace of the soul. In God's supreme, withdrawn and timeless hush, and potent energy meet. It is in this timeless hush that the witnessing self and the dynamic energy meet, and the silence knew itself and thought took form. Silence becomes self-aware and thought is born. Self-made from the dual power, creation rose. Self-made from the dual power, the seeing self and the potent energy, they constitute the dual power. This creation rose. In the still self he lived, and it in him, Ashwapati. In the still self he lived, and it, the self in him, its mute, immemorable listening depths, its vastness and its stillness were his own. One being with it he grew, wise, powerful, free. Because he became wide, he became powerful. And because he was both wide and powerful, he became free. Couldn't stop that.